Imagine being so close to victory that the entire world seems within your grasp, only to make one decision that destroys everything. This is the story of how Germany went from conquering most of Europe to facing complete defeat in World War II. Between 1939 and 1941, German forces achieved what many thought impossible. They swept across Europe with lightning speed, conquering nation after nation. Their military machine seemed unstoppable. Poland fell in just weeks. France, the mighty military power that had held firm for 4 years in the First World War, surrendered in barely 6 weeks. The Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, Denmark, all fell before the German advance. By the summer of 1941, Germany controlled more European territory than Napoleon ever had. Victory seemed within reach. But then, Germany made one catastrophic decision that would seal their fate and change the course of human history forever. Today, we'll explore that single mistake that turned certain victory into devastating defeat, and discover why historians consider it the most important turning point of the entire war. To understand Germany's great mistake, we must first appreciate just how powerful they had become by 1941. The German war machine was built on a revolutionary new style of warfare called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This strategy combined fast-moving tanks, aircraft, and motorized infantry to punch through enemy lines and surround entire armies before they could react. It was warfare at a speed the world had never seen before. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, the Polish army, though brave, was still using cavalry horses against German tanks. The outcome was swift and decisive. The German military had learned important lessons from the First World War. Instead of getting bogged down in long, costly battles, they focused on speed and surprise. Their generals were brilliant tacticians who understood how to coordinate different branches of the military like a perfectly tuned orchestra. The German Air Force, known as the Luftwaffe, dominated the skies over Europe. Their pilots were highly trained, and their aircraft were among the most advanced in the world. Meanwhile, German tank divisions carved through enemy defenses like knives through butter. The German army wasn't just well-equipped, it was also highly motivated and disciplined. Years of preparation had created a military force that seemed nearly invincible. Nation after nation fell to this unstoppable machine, and by early 1941, Germany controlled territory stretching from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to deep into Eastern Europe. By the spring of 1941, Germany's position appeared unbeatable. They had conquered France, which many considered the strongest military power in Europe. The famous Maginot Line, France's supposedly impregnable chain of fortifications, had been bypassed entirely when German forces swept through Belgium and attacked from an unexpected direction. Great Britain stood alone, battered by German bombing raids during the Battle of Britain, but still fighting. However, Britain was isolated on its island, and many observers wondered how long they could hold out without allies. Germany controlled vast resources across occupied Europe: coal from Belgium, oil from Romania, industrial capacity from France and Czechoslovakia. The German economy was running at full capacity, producing weapons, vehicles, and supplies for their military machine. Their submarine fleet was terrorizing Allied shipping in the Atlantic Ocean, threatening to starve Britain into submission. German scientists and engineers were developing new technologies that could potentially change the war entirely. From an outside perspective, it seemed like only a matter of time before Germany achieved total victory. The German leadership believed they were on the verge of creating a European empire that would last for generations. Their early successes had been so complete and so rapid that they began to believe their own propaganda about being unstoppable. This confidence, however, would soon become their greatest weakness. Success had made them overconfident, and overconfidence would lead them to make the most devastating strategic error in military history. They were about to bite off far more than they could chew. On June 22, 1941, Germany made the decision that would ultimately cost them the war. Despite already fighting Britain and managing a vast occupied territory, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. This was the one mistake that changed everything. At first glance, the decision might have seemed logical to German leaders. The Soviet Union was enormous, but Germany's military had proven unstoppable against every other opponent. German intelligence suggested that the Soviet military was weak and disorganized. Recent Soviet losses in a war against tiny Finland seemed to prove this point. German leaders believed they could knock the Soviet Union out of the war in just a few months, before winter set in. They thought Soviet forces would collapse just as quickly as France had. But this assumption was catastrophically wrong. The Soviet Union wasn't just another European country, it was the largest nation on Earth, stretching across 11 time zones. It had a population of nearly 200 million people and virtually unlimited natural resources. More importantly, the Soviet people had something that many of Germany's previous opponents had lacked: they were fighting for their homeland's very survival. When German forces crossed the Soviet border, they triggered a conflict of unprecedented scale and brutality. Instead of the quick victory they expected, Germany found itself locked in a massive struggle that would drain their resources and split their attention between multiple fronts. The invasion of the Soviet Union transformed World War II from a series of quick victories into a grinding war of attrition that Germany simply couldn't win. The consequences of Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union became clear within months. Initially, German forces advanced rapidly, capturing huge amounts of territory and hundreds of thousands of prisoners. It seemed like their strategy was working. But as winter approached, the true magnitude of their mistake became obvious. Germany had prepared for a short summer campaign, not a winter war in one of the harshest climates on Earth. German soldiers found themselves fighting in temperatures that dropped to 40 degrees below zero, wearing uniforms designed for European weather. Their equipment began to fail in the extreme cold, tank engines wouldn't start, rifles jammed, and supply lines stretched impossibly thin across thousands of miles of hostile territory. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union proved far more resilient than anyone had expected. Instead of collapsing, the Soviet military began to reorganize and fight back with increasing effectiveness. Soviet factories that couldn't be evacuated were destroyed to prevent them from falling into German hands. Entire cities were evacuated, and millions of people retreated deeper into the vast Soviet interior. The Soviet Union could trade space for time in a way that no other country Germany had invaded could do. Even more critically, Germany now found itself fighting a war on multiple fronts, something German military planners had desperately wanted to avoid. They were still fighting Britain in North Africa and defending against British bombing raids, while simultaneously trying to conquer the largest country on Earth. German resources, which had seemed unlimited when focused on single opponents, were now stretched impossibly thin across multiple massive theaters of war. The invasion of the Soviet Union set in motion a chain of events that sealed Germany's fate. As German forces became bogged down in the vast Soviet territory, other nations began to see opportunity. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States entered the war, bringing massive industrial capacity and fresh military forces to the Allied cause. Germany now faced not just Britain and the Soviet Union, but also the industrial might of America. The mathematics of the conflict had fundamentally changed. Germany, even with its occupied territories, simply couldn't match the combined production capacity of the Soviet Union, Britain, and the United States working together. Soviet factories, relocated beyond German reach, began producing thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery pieces. American factories converted from making cars to making bombers and warships at an incredible pace. Meanwhile, German forces found themselves trapped in a series of increasingly desperate battles across the frozen Soviet landscape. The Battle of Stalingrad became a symbol of Germany's overextension. Hundreds of thousands of German troops were surrounded and destroyed in a single campaign. Each German defeat on the Eastern Front weakened their ability to defend against British and American forces in Western Europe. By 1943, Germany was fighting desperately on multiple fronts while facing opponents with superior numbers, better supply lines, and unlimited resources. The quick, decisive victories that had characterized Germany's early war years became impossible when facing enemies who could absorb massive losses and keep fighting. The single decision to invade the Soviet Union had transformed Germany from predator to prey. Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union stands as one of history's greatest strategic blunders because it violated the most basic principle of warfare: never fight a war you cannot win. By opening a second front against an opponent with virtually unlimited resources and territory, Germany guaranteed their own defeat. The invasion transformed World War II from a series of German victories into a prolonged struggle that Germany had no realistic chance of winning. Military historians continue to debate whether Germany could have won the war if they had made different choices. Some argue that focusing entirely on defeating Britain, or securing German gains in Western Europe, might have led to a negotiated peace. Others point out that conflict with the Soviet Union may have been inevitable given the opposing ideologies and territorial ambitions of both sides. What we know for certain is that the decision to invade the Soviet Union marked the beginning of the end for Germany's wartime ambitions. It united the world's three greatest industrial powers, Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States, against a common enemy. The lesson from this historical turning point extends far beyond military strategy. It teaches us about the dangers of overconfidence, the importance of understanding your limitations, and the catastrophic consequences that can result from a single poor decision. Germany's one mistake reminds us that even the most powerful forces can be brought down by hubris and strategic miscalculation. In the end, Germany's greatest strength, their early military successes, became their greatest weakness when it led them to believe they were truly unstoppable. History shows us that no one ever is.